Hey guys, so today I'm going to be teaching you about electrophoresis, which is a process of sorting DNA by size through running electricity through a gel which contains DNA samples. So to start off electrophoresis, what you need to do is create your gel, which you're eventually going to put DNA samples in. Your gel is made out of agarose, which is made out of seaweed, and it's basically like a jello, but you're putting DNA in it and it's not for eating. So the way you create it is you're gonna have agarose, which is made out of that seaweed, in powder form, and you're gonna take that agarose and you're gonna measure it out. And you're gonna measure out. You could either have a denser gel, which would be better for sorting smaller pieces of DNA, or you could have a less dense gel, which would be better for sorting larger pieces of DNA. And if it's going to be more dense, you want more agarose, you would measure out more. And if you want it less dense, you want less agarose. So what you're going to do is you're going to take that agarose, you're going to measure out however much you have, and you're going to put it in a flask, which is going to have a buffer in it, which is that saltwater concentrate, measured out to however much agarose you want to make. So it's like, once you put it in this flask, you're going to put it in a stir bar, which is magnetic, and you're going to put it on top of a hot plate, and the hot plate is both going to heat it up so that the agarose dissolves into the buffer when it reaches a boil, and that stir bar, which is magnetic, is going to be turning and stirring it for you so that it doesn't burn on the bottom and the agarose is evenly mixed into the buffer. Once it's dissolved, once the agarose is dissolved into the buffer, you have this like kind of liquid in your flask. You're going to let it cool for a little bit since it just went up to a boil. And after it's cooled so that you can comfortably hold it in your hand, you still want it to be warm because once it cools down fully, it's going to turn into a solid. It's going to turn into a jello, and you don't want that because you don't want your gel to solidify while it's still in your flask. So once it's cooled down, you're going to take your gel tray, and in your gel tray you have a comb, and that comb, as you can see, it can slot into any of these little kind of holes here along the side, but for our purposes, we usually slot it in right at the beginning. So up here at the very top of your gel box. So as you can see, these little combs, this is a comb, and these little lines here don't go all the way down to the bottom of this thing. When you're using your gel tray, you're gonna have tape on either side of here so that it's closed down and you can hold liquid in it. So with your tape, you're gonna pour the somewhat cooled down but not solidified agarose, and you pour it along the edge here because you don't want to create too many swirls or disturbances in the gel once it dries, once it solidifies. So you pour it slowly until the agarose reaches around, or the gel reaches around a third of the way up these little combs right here. And the way this works is, since it doesn't reach all the way to the bottom of the thing, there's still going to be a layer of agarose of the gel, which solidifies all the way on the bottom. And then afterwards, it's going to fill up these little in-between slots here, but it's going to leave these spots where the plastic is clear so that when it's solidified totally, it will solidify when you leave it for like maybe 20 minutes, when it's solidified, you can pop this out, and you're going to have little wells or little holes in your gel going along this line, and those holes, those wells, are not going to reach all the way to the bottom, so they're not going to drain out of this tray if you poured anything into them. So once you have your solidified gel and your wells, which would be in here, you're going to take your gel box, and what you do is your wells are over here. I can put the comb in to show. Your wells are over on this side, and so you're going to slot in this box right here in the middle so that the wells, where the comb is, are facing this black end, not the red end. The reason for this is DNA has a negative charge, and this black end, it has a little negative here. This black end is a negative end when we are going to be running electricity through this box, and this red end is a positive end. And as we know, negative to negative repels each other, and negative to positive attracts. So this DNA over here, which hasn't been put in here yet, and we also remove the tape before we slot it in here so that the electricity can run through. So basically then, you're going to take your buffer, which conducts electricity because it's like a saltwater mix, and you're going to pour the buffer from either of these ends of these wells in until it covers over your gel, so like a thin layer of buffer over your gel. Once you've done that, you're going to take your micropipette, which has your different DNA amounts, and you're going to pop out your comb, so you have your wells here, and you're going to put the DNA in the wells. The reason that you are putting your DNA in the wells after you've already put the buffer in is because if you decided to put the DNA in first, and then, which is liquid, and then put the buffer in, then the buffer would just wash away the DNA and it would not be in each of the wells. So with this method, your DNA also, it would normally be clear, but it's not going to be clear because you put loading dye in your DNA before you load it. That loading dye achieves a couple things. One is colored, so that means that while we're loading the DNA into these wells, which into the well, which the buffer is clear and the gel is mostly clear, so it's really hard to see. When it's colored, it's going to be much easier to see if the DNA ends up in the well properly or not. And the second reason is because this buffer, the loading dye adds density to the DNA, and that causes it to sink into the buffer, which makes it easier to put into the wells because you want it sinking into the well instead of staying kind of floating up at the top. So to load your DNA, you're going to pick which wells to place it in. You want to place it asymmetrically, so you might have one empty well here. So you might have, like, if you had, like, say 10 wells, you wouldn't want to load 8 of those wells and leave one empty on this side and one empty on this side, because then if you turned it around, you wouldn't know which way the DNA was. So you want to load it asymmetrically and then write in a notebook the configuration, how you loaded the DNA into those wells. You load it using proper micropipetting techniques, which I talked about before. The reason that the way that you can figure out unknown size pieces of DNA from this process is if you loaded a DNA standard or DNA ladder, say, on this side, that means that there's going to be a group of DNA with a bunch of different sizes, like maybe 1,000 base pairs, 2,000 base pairs, 2,000 base pairs, 1,000, 500, etc. And you're going to know how many sizes groups there are in that DNA sample and how big each piece is. So when you are, say, if you're loading a different group of DNA, which has like 5 different size groups, but you don't know what those size groups are, then you can compare how far those size groups traveled against how far your standard or your ladder traveled and figure out, I know that this one is 1,000 base pairs and this one in the unknown DNA size looks really similar to that, so this one must be around 1,000 base pairs. And then you use a graph and math to figure out the rest. So the way the actual process works is once you have your DNA loaded in here, and once you have your buffer poured in, then you're going to take this lid, and you're going to attach it to your box. And after you've attached this really sturdily to your box, which I'm doing right now, after you've done that, what you're going to do is you're going to plug in to, it's quite hard, there we go. So after you've done that, you're going to plug these guys into an electricity box, and you can choose what the voltage is. So a higher voltage is going to mean a faster, like the DNA is going to be pushed farther and faster. But the basic way it works is your DNA is over here, facing the negative end. Electricity is running negative current through this one, positive current through this one. The negative current is pushing the DNA this way, and the positive current is pulling it this way simultaneously. Those really small pieces of DNA are going to have a much easier time making it over here to the positive end, because even though Jello to us, or your gel, looks really solid, it's actually not. It's like a sponge on the inside, especially for DNA, which is so small. And DNA can travel through those little holes in the gel all the way to the positive end. But if they're really big pieces, it's going to be harder for them to travel through. It's going to take much longer to find those holes and to make it through. So however long you're running that electricity through for, you're going to end up with your smaller pieces way on this end and your bigger pieces still more over here, because and separating out into different size groups. You're going to be able to see those size groups once you stain it. So, which is also how you can figure out comparing those bands to the standard to figure out how big the DNA pieces are. So after you've run electricity through this, for however long you're going to run through it, you are going to take out your gel, which is on this tray, and you're going to slide it onto another tray, your staining tray. And when it's in your other tray, you're going to take stain, which is a kind of like a dye that binds to your DNA, but not to the rest of it. And you're going to pour it until it covers the gel in a thin layer. And you're going to cover it with tinfoil because this stain is light sensitive. And then you place it on a rocking thing and let it shake back and forth for around 20 minutes to 2 hours, because that rocking is going to help it spread throughout the whole gel evenly. Once it's been 20 minutes to 2 hours, you can take it out of that tray, take off the tinfoil, pour out the stain, and you basically take it over to a light box. So you take your gel, you place it onto a light box, and it's going to be shining light through the gel. And that light is going to activate the stain, which has bound itself to the DNA, and the DNA is going to glow in that light because of the stain, which is activated by that light. You're then just going to take a picture of the DNA, and you can see really clearly the different bands along it, which can show different size groups of DNA. And that's how you can use electrophoresis to separate out different DNA sizes.